Hello and welcome back to Adobe Creative Cloud Design Week here at Creative Live. Now before we get back to our content with Erica, we'd like to thank everyone that has made this week possible. All right, so we'd like to start off with the biggest thanks we'd like to give is to the people, like Adobe, because without Adobe, being here, we really wouldn't be here without Adobe. And all their great software that they provide to us. So that's where the biggest thanks. Really? Yeah, I've worked with Adobe software for over 20 years, and I would not be with my career currently if we didn't have that. So thank you very much to Adobe. And then we'd also like to thank all the other sponsors here this week who have provided us with great prizes and have made it possible for these great educators to come down here and teach you guys about the Adobe products. All right, the Creative Live audience. Thank you very much, Creative Live audience. Without you guys out there on the internet, where would we be? We appreciate you guys watching us for all our classes. We appreciate you upgrading and purchasing our classes, and of course, being in our chat rooms and asking questions and chatting with us so we can bring you the best possible experience. I'd like to thank the Creative Live crew. Back there in our booth today, we have Adam, we got Josh and Kellen. Thank you guys for rocking it out. We'd like to thank our producer, Kathy, as well as upstairs, working hard, taking down your questions is CL Scott. So thank you very much, Scott. Our in-studio audience, thanks to Keith and Varsha. You guys have been great, sticking with the content and nailing the questions. So great having you guys here as well. Thank you very much. And of course, our instructors for today, we'd like to thank them. William was great covering plugins. We'd like to thank Mr. Jason Hoppy, who always rocks it out here at Creative Live. And of course, Erica Gammett. Thank you, Erica. It's great having you here. We really appreciate it. So you guys, without any further ado, we'd like to get back to Illustrator's drawing tools for the drawing challenge, which includes me, with Erica Gammett. So we'd like to ask you guys to join the conversation by going to our chat rooms. You can do that by right on the bottom of your screen. You will see a blue Join the Chat button. Go ahead and click that. Join the chat. You can ask questions and chat with other people that are interested and probably drawing challenged. Or if you want to just communicate via Twitter, use the hashtag CreativeCloudWeek.
That's right, drawing challenge. This is so fun.
I know.
So also we are still having a quote contest. We will be having them throughout the week. So lots of really great prizes. You're going to want to enter to win those prizes, I think. So when Erica says something excellent, go ahead to our Facebook page and click on the green Adobe CC contest button and write her quote in there for a chance to win. Also, please include the name of the class with your entry in order to be eligible. I'm sure you'll have a lot of good opportunities to win this time because we're getting into a pretty fun class, I think. So Erica, take it away.
All right. Well, we're going to do some drawing for the drawing challenge. We're going to look at the tools that are available here, and I'm going to show you just some of the theories that I use, some of the procedures, I guess, that I use when I'm drawing. So I told you to think about shapes and just see everything as a shape, and then I also use a photo as a guide, and we're going to do that as well. So I just want to go through and talk about some of the tools. And I know in my previous session, we were talking about patterns and all that. We talked about some of the tools. But I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on how I use the tools. And again, I'm going to start with the shape tools that are here. The pre-made shapes are just huge. I can't say enough how I think in these shapes. So these are the ones I have to work with. I have a rectangle tool. I have a rounded rectangle tool, but I don't use that. I'm going to actually create a rectangle tool and add an effect to give me my rounded corners. An ellipse tool, I use the polygon tool. So I need to make triangles or triangles or octagons, anything like that. And I also have a special star tool for when I need a star. Flare tools, I don't use that very often at all, but play with that. It's kind of fun. Like I said, there's some other tools underneath the line segment tool, which are things like arcs and spirals and some grids and this polar grid. We'll just look at that and see what that does. So if that comes in handy in your drawing, go ahead and use that. I have never used that in my life, but I'm sure there are people that do. So I'm going to stick to these shapes that I have over here, these pre-made shapes. And these are closed path tools. So what that means is that when I create it, it actually has an entire path and it's enclosed. It isn't open like when we use the pen tool. All right, so that's what those tools are. So I think of everything in a shape. And I think, how do I add things and how do I create things in a shape? So for me, if I wanted to create, let's say I wanted to create a tombstone. Stick with the fall theme. We'll go into Halloween here. I'm going to create a square. To me, it's a square with a circle on top, right? That's all it is. So I'm going to create a square, and then I'm also going to create a circle. And you notice with Smart Guides on, it tells me when everything's centered, right? So I've got I've drawn my rectangle. I'm going to use my mouse and just line this up when it shows me that it's centered. I'm going to hold down the Option or the Alt key, which is, let's actually switch to the correct tool. I need to put a circle on top of there. Let's line that up again with the center. And I'm going to hold down the Option or the Alt key, which draws from the center outwards. And I'm just going to go ahead and draw the top item that's here. So now I have basically the shape that I'm looking for. I have to do something else to it. I obviously don't want this line here, but I couldn't draw this by hand if I had wanted to. If I were to use the pen tool, I would have to click. I'm going to hold Shift to get that bottom, which is great, and click again. But now I have to come over here and hold down and try and get this right. Well, that's not exactly what I was looking for at all. I mean, I could draw that. That's a decent looking little, little gravestone, but it's not quite what I wanted. And it was a lot more trouble than to just take two shapes and plop them on top of each other. So again, I always try and think of things in shapes. All right, so we'll do something with that in just a little while. We'll just put that off to the side. Some of the other shapes that I might create is I might say, okay, I want to take something that is a circle. And maybe I want to cut out another circle out of the middle of it. So I might create another circle here, and maybe I want to make, say, a moon or something like that. I'm just going to drag that, and I can start to see my moon shape over here, but I have to, again, do something with that in addition to what I just made here. But it all starts with these basic tools that are here. And before we get too far into creating and combining these shapes, we've got the starts of them here, I want to talk a little bit about fills and strokes. All right, so when I select an item, it automatically over here, if I come down here to the bottom of my tool panel, or it's also replicated over here in the color panel and also the swatches panel, I can also see what is a fill, or where all my fill and stroke colors are. So if I come over here, back down here to the tool panel, I've got my stroke, which is the outline, and I've got my fill. And often what I do, and we already have done that twice today at least, is I want to change the fill, and I forgot that the stroke was the foremost little icon that was there. And so when I click a color, it automatically assigned it to the stroke and not to the fill. So if I make that mistake, I can just use this little swap stroke and fill button and put a fill, and now the stroke is none and the fill is solid green. I can also decide, well, if I wanted a stroke and a fill to be the same, I can grab either one. I'm just clicking on it and dragging it across, and now it applies it to the stroke as well. So now it has a stroke and a fill of green, which might not sound very handy, but there's actually a lot of reasons why I might want that to happen. Looking also at the stroke, let's actually zoom in a little bit here. I'm going to open up the strokes panel as well, and we're going to look at that. And by default, it has a stroke, whatever the last size was that I used. I'm going to go ahead and choose, let's make this a 3-point stroke. I have some different options for the strokes as well, what the cap looks like. In this case, we're not going to see the cap because it's a closed path, so we're never going to see what the end of that stroke looks like because it's continuous. But one thing I can look at is, let's actually fill this with a color really quickly. So I'm going to come in here and let's just give that a color. And we'll get back to our moon in just a little while, but right now I'm just going to fill it with some color. And I'm going to look at the stroke, and I'm going to come down here to where the stroke is aligned. And if I look, I have aligned stroke to center, inside, or outside. And what does that mean? Well, let's make this a really thick stroke really quick. I'm going to make this a 10-point stroke. And you can kind of see that the line is right down the middle of that stroke. And basically what it's saying is that the stroke is aligned to the center. It means that where that line is, where the line is that I drew, and I can see what it's made up of by going to the View menu and choosing Outline, I can see that it's just this simple line. And when it added the fill, the appearance, it said put half of it outside and half of it inside. So we've got a 10-point stroke. 5 points are outside that line, and 5 points are inside. Why does that matter? It might not matter at all. But if I were lining this up and I said I wanted the stroke to begin at 3 inches, if I turn my rulers on, and I wanted this to actually start at 3 inches, well, what it's going to do is it's going to tell me when this point is at 3 inches. But so the shape, this simple shape in itself is at 3 inches, but 5 points of it is sticking over the other end. We might not want that. We might want to actually tell it that we want the fill to entirely go inside. So now we can see that everything is inside that circle. So if you've already created a shape and you've said it's starting at 3 inches from the top and 3 inches from the side, and then you give it a 10-point stroke aligned to the center, now some of it is spilling over outside of that. So usually by default, it's split half and half. But there's a lot of times you might want it to fit like that. Or you might want the entire stroke to be outside that circle. So the circle itself is not, whatever the shape is, or whatever the size is. If I said that was 3 by 3 circle, it's not actually 3 by 3. This is 3 by 3, plus it has 10 points around on both sides. All right, so just keep that in mind. By default, it does this. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. Some of the things we might do is we could add a dash line if we wanted to. And this, again, this is going to play into when we start combining shapes and start drawing with them, how we can make changes to the shapes that are there. We could do a dash line. It automatically takes 12 points. And that means that the gap is also 12 points. So the gap and the lines are exactly equal. But I can create a new one if I wanted to. I can come over here and say, well, the gap is only 6 points. All right, so now we've got a 12-point segment with a 6-point gap. I can do that for 3 separate items. Maybe I want it to be followed by a 6-point line and a 6-point gap. All right, so I'm just putting 6 PT, 6 PT. All right, so I can actually just change how that stroke looks. All right, so I can go ahead and change also how the corners look. It's not going to make any difference on a circle, but otherwise it's just going to continually draw however it needs to draw it. But if we choose this here, it automatically makes the corners exactly the same throughout. So that's on by default, which is nice. We can also do arrowheads. Let's go back to the pen tool really quickly. And I'm just clicking to get points, and we absolutely do not want this to be that dashed line. Let's deselect that, and let's take off the stroke. One thing to keep in mind when you're drawing with the pen tool is that it's automatically going to take whatever you drew last, as does everything in Illustrator, but it's automatically giving it a yellow fill, which I don't really want on a stroke necessarily, because what it automatically does is it needs to just create that closed path. Even though it's not really a closed path, it just goes ahead and fills with that. So when I'm working with the pen tool, I try to remember to just have a stroke on there and not the fill itself. So we're going to come down here to arrowheads, and I can say, okay, let's have how it starts. That's awfully big. Let's actually try just that there, and we'll use this little one down here. All right, so I can choose the beginning and ending arrowheads as well on a stroke. All right, so just some things to keep in mind for a stroke. If you want an arrow, don't draw an arrow. Just grab the line and create an arrowhead. And one of the things we might want to do at the end is come up to Object and say Expand Appearance. So now it's not really a line that we can draw and have it redraw. Now when I move it, it's stretching the arrowhead. If I undo that and step back one more time to where I did not expand the appearance, if I move the size of this frame, you notice it's just redrawing the arrowhead nicely. It's not going to stretch it. It hasn't expanded the appearance. It still sees it as a line with a special something on top, those arrowheads. Once we expand the appearance, it now just sees it as if we drew it, and so when I stretch it, it's going to go ahead and stretch that object as well. Now let's delete that. Let's just make this a little bit different here. One thing I want to open up is the Appearance panel, and in Illustrator, you can have multiple fills and strokes on an object, which is really cool. So in this case, maybe I want this to be this strange little dashed line that we created, but I could also create another stroke if I wanted to. So by using the Appearance panel, I see stroke and fill. I can come over here and choose these little buttons at the bottom, add a new stroke or add a new fill. So I can go ahead and add a whole nother stroke. It automatically puts it on top, which will actually put it on top of what we call the stacking order. So whenever we put something on the page, the next thing we put on is automatically on top of that, everything else that's on the page. If they don't touch each other, that's fine, but once they do, you're going to see that that's how things are stacked. So when I put this on here, it automatically put it on top. Well, what I want to do is drag it in the panel and just drag it below the other stroke. And right now it doesn't look any different because they're exactly the same. So I'm going to come down here, I'm just in the stroke panel, and I'm going to go ahead and click on the little stroke color, and I get my swatches. And let's go ahead and give that a color. Let's give that a nice dark blue. And I don't want it to be dashed. So what I want to do is anytime there's words that are blue and underlined like this, we see them up here, we see them over here, that means that we can click on that and pop open the panel that we need. Instead of going to the strokes panel, I can just pop it open here. And I say, well, I don't want this one to be dashed. I'd like it to be solid, and because it's underneath, I probably would want to be able to see it. In this case, it looks like it filled in the gaps of the dash line that's there. But if I didn't have a dash line, I could have two solid lines on top of each other. I just want to make this one a little bit bigger. All right, so I just open that up, and I'll just click on that to close that back up. So now I have two strokes on the exact same object. And the reason that's handy, instead of doing two circles on top of each other, is that when I change this, obviously, it all changes together. All right, so I've just created extra strokes on top of that same object. Does that make sense? All right, so let's actually delete this, because that just got too unwieldy there. And I'm just going to go back and draw another circle. So I'm holding down the Shift key again, so I get that nice solid one. If you notice, what it did is it automatically drew sort of what the last one looked like. And what that's doing, if I click on the panel menu, the appearance panel menu, it says new art has basic appearance. What happens by default is that it wants to use whatever I last had selected. So I selected this yellow circle with the blue stroke. When I created a new one, it automatically wanted to create one that looked the same. But because it says basic appearance, it's going to take the topmost stroke and the topmost fill. So in this case, it had two strokes, and the one on top is the one that it ended up taking. So if I didn't do that, let's actually undo that. Let's get out of there and undo it, and then I'm going to tell it not to have the basic appearance. Now when I draw something, it's actually going to have everything. So it's going to automatically take everything that was last drawn, the last thing that was drawn. Does that make sense? So that's why every time you draw, it has something that looks like just what you had, which can be really beneficial, so that if you're drawing a bunch of things together, it automatically has that same look. But it also can be annoying if you don't want it to always look like the last thing you drew. So what I do sometimes is if I said, oh, I'm about ready to draw this circle and I want it to be green, I'll just click this green one first. Now we'll make a new circle, and it automatically looks like that item. So I tend to try and click something that I want it to look like before I draw the new item. All right, so let's draw that again. Let's get our circle back here. And again, we're going to use this to create a moon. And so to start with, I'm actually just going to select this item here. Let's go ahead and make that yellow to start with, just so we kind of go, okay, that's what it's going to look like. There's going to be a moon here eventually. So in my mind, you can see where, as I'm drawing, I go, oh yeah, that looks like a moon, you know, just trying to ignore the green that's there. And I can look at it and go, okay, yeah, it's looking like a good shape. I like that. Let's do something with that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the Pathfinder tool. Or I'm also going to use the Shape Builder tool, which is kind of the Pathfinder tool, but for dummies. But I don't like to say for dummies because I don't feel like I'm a dummy. I'm not an artist, I can admit that. But I won't admit that I'm a dummy yet, maybe later. So I'm going to take these items and I'm going to open up the Pathfinder tool. I'm actually going to zoom out just a little bit so we can see this a little bit better. This page around a little bit. All right, so I'm going to open up the Pathfinder panel, which is under the Window menu, under Pathfinder, if it's not already open and floating around. And I'm just going to step through some of these items that we can do with these objects that are here. So I have both of them selected, and the green one is on top because, again, I put the yellow one first and the green one on top. So the green one is in front, and that's going to come in handy on some of the Pathfinders that are here. So I'm going to select every object that's there, and I'm going to go ahead and just step through them and see what we end up with each of these. So I'm going to click Unite. That's going to make one big object. So again, if I undo that, that's what I would probably use down here. If I wanted these to be one object, I'm going to choose Unite. When I do that, there's that nice object that I have, right? So it sees it as one object. If I create a fill for that, it automatically fills it with that color. All right, so that's what I do when I'm trying to create these shapes. I'm trying to think, okay, how is this going to end up looking? All right, so that's Unite. Let's try this one here. This one is minus front. So everything that's in the front will go away. So the green is in front, it goes away. There's our moon, right? So that's how we make a moon. We just take two items, put one on top, and the other one disappears. Now I have that moon shape that I can work with. I'm going to undo that and bring back what I had. This one here is intersect, so it's going to create a compound shape. So when I do that, everywhere there's an intersection, it will create that item. So this is where these two items intersect. So we look at that, I end up with just that shape. So for me, if I was trying to get a nice shape, I'm going to figure out how to overlap. When those two things overlap, it creates the shape I need. I'm going to use intersect for that. If I option click or alt click on that, it actually creates a shape and leaves that intersection as kind of a cutout through the middle of the shape. So I'm going to alt or option click on that. So now I have it there, and I have this. These are actually, they're still here. Before it disappeared and all we had was this shape. Now the original shape remains, but this shape is open. So if you had a lot of items overlapped and we clicked on that, you could see that you can kind of punch out these holes where they overlap. And for me, I like to call this the hunt and peck panel, because I don't know what half of those do until I do them. Sometimes you don't know what they're going to look like when you do them, right? So I just start making the shapes and then I play with them. That's why I like the shape builder tool, because it lets me bypass a lot of this. And we'll do that in just a second. Exclude, let's just do it and see what it is. Now it got rid of everything that's there. It got rid of the part that they share in common. I'm just undoing after each of these. This one's cool, this one's divide. This one I use a lot. If I wanted something, and we're going to use this in our drawing section in a second when we start drawing this cowboy thing we're going to draw. So if I wanted this shape, and I decided that I wanted it to be, I just wanted this weird shape at the top. And again, when I'm working with lines, I want to make sure I don't have a fill. All right, so I wanted just this weird shape at the top half of this egg thing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select a line, and I'm going to shift select that object, and I'm going to use divide. Now it doesn't look any different, because what it did is it cut it in half, it divided it, and it grouped them together. So I'm going to do object, ungroup, and now I can select just this item. Or I can just add a color to that item, or whatever it is I need to do to that item there. All right, so that's what I do all the time, is that I take something and I go, I can't draw these two halves and get them to fit together really well. I'll draw one thing, run a line across them, and then it just chops them right in half. And we're gonna use that a lot when we start drawing in just a few minutes here. So that's a tool I use all the time. I'm gonna undo, let's see, just to select all these and delete that. We'll go back to our two shapes over here. So again, whatever it is you want to do in the Pathfinder, you have to make sure those shapes are selected first. I'm actually going to do, let's add one more shape in here, just so I have one more item to work with. And it doesn't really matter the color. I just want to grab these items, and I want to choose this one. I kind of like this one. I call this explode, because what it does is it says trim, doesn't look any different. Why did it do that? It should not be. Let's actually fill this in here with a fill. Flip-flop those, there we go. And I grab these, not that guy down there, and trim. And it doesn't look any different, but what it did is it basically did the same thing. It broke them into shapes, which doesn't look any differently than what we had. But if I go ahead and ungroup those, I can now take these items and pull them apart. So I like that. Like if you were trying to think, if you were like doing, say, technical manuals or something like that, you have all your individual parts, you draw them together, hit trim, and it explodes, and then you just need to pull them all apart, and you've got that nice exploded look to them. I'm going to do all that and get back to where I have individual items here. And let's pull this guy. I think I need to step back one more. There we go. Let's just step back till he's gone. There we go. All right, so grab those two again. This one here is merge. Whoops, I just got rid of all my tools. We didn't want to do that. Let's come back here and try merge again. And I just went ahead and merged it into one item. Again, sometimes what they do, you're like, I don't see any difference. Let's try crop. Crop just took everything in the middle. I'm not sure why it left this one, but it did. Crops it down to its basic formats here. Outline just creates outlines for everything, which is kind of nice. It's the same as if you go up here and look at outline. And the last one is minus back. So everything that's back behind will go away. So when I do that, everything went away, including, so not just what you see behind, but the entire object that is behind gets cut out. So it's basically the same as minus front, except it's whatever's behind. So again, just layering objects on top of each other and using those pathfinders is really helpful. But let's make that pathfinder go away, because here's my new favorite tool. It came actually, I think, in CS5, I want to say, and it's called the Shape Builder tool. Zoom in on that. It looks like a little cloud here. And here's what I use this for. Same kind of shape that I have here, and I want to do the merge thing, the same thing as we did with merge, but I can grab an item, and actually let's make a couple more circles actually. We'll just grab that here as well, and we'll fill that in. So I have those items, and I'm going to grab everything I want to work with. So again, I have to make sure I select them all. Don't have to group them or anything. And I'm going to use this Shape Builder tool. And now, as I roll over each thing, it sees each thing that visually looks like a separate item is a separate item. And where this is kind of helpful is with the merge, it sees each item as itself and how it interacts. This one says every time there's a line dividing it, it's a new item. So if it looks like a new item to you, a different separate item to you, it probably does to the Shape Builder tool as well. So as I roll over each piece, it sees it here. So what I can do is I can click and drag. You notice when I click, it has a little red outline. I drag across here, it says, oh, now it's one thing. So now I kind of have that yellow circle, but the part where the green is isn't included in that. So now I have that as one item. So I can go ahead and grab that item, and now I've just created an item like that. So again, the Shape Builder tool just merges everything together. So let's select all these again, make sure they're all selected, and I can use the Shape Builder tool and come across here. And then if I decided I wanted this to be a part of it as well, drag that across as well. So now I have one big item. I could have used the merge on that to get to that point, but maybe I only wanted some of those items and not everything. If I step backwards a little bit, let's go back to that there, and I select all those items again, and I use the Shape Builder tool. I can say, take all these and add those together. But then what I want to do is come down here and I want to hold down the Option key or the Alt key and drag across these two. And I want to get rid of those. All right, so if you hold down the Option or Alt key, it gets rid of everything. If you just drag across, it includes all of those. So I do that all the time when I want to create just really kind of crazy shapes. Let's take this, and I'm just going to grab a bunch more circles. And I do this all the time. All right, so maybe I want to make sure that these two are this, these little bubbles that are here are sticking off this main bubble. So I'm going to select all my items, everything I think is going to be involved in this, choose my Shape Builder tool and say, come across here and drag across here. And now I've got this shape. Does not look like a mouse in Southern California at all. Just wanted to point that out for legal reasons. All right, so I'm going to come over here and I'm going to hold down the Option key or the Alt key and drag across these two, which will cut them out. And I picked up my mouse, Option or Alt, drag across here and get rid of those two as well. So again, I could never have drawn that shape if I wanted to, but I can create the shapes and delete them or add to them as needed. So if I decide I wanted, something else to be cut out of there, maybe I want a star. Right, so come in here and maybe I just create the star here, and I'll actually place it right on top. And I just want the star missing out of the middle of that item. Select both items, use the Shape Builder tool, and just hit the Option or Alt key and click. And it just deletes it out of there. So now I have one item that looks like that, and it's actually see-through, so I've made a little cutout. So I'm going to take this, we'll give it a different color so we can see through it, and we'll choose Object Arrange, and this is the stacking order. I'm telling it where it goes in the stacking order. It's automatically on top. I want to send that blue rectangle to the very back. Let's send to back. So now it's actually back behind. I made that nice little cutout in the shape just by using the Shape Builder tool. I love the Shape Builder tool. That and the blob brush, which I'm not going to go over, but the blob brush is cool too. So make sure you check that out as well. All right, so I'm going to delete that. So I use that a lot more than the Pathfinder tool, just because, like I said, the Pathfinder tool to me sometimes doesn't make sense how things are going to work. But when I see shapes together and start needing to combine them, using that the Shape Builder tool to me just makes a lot of sense. All right, so let's talk a little bit about color and gradient really quickly. So I'm just going to create a shape. Talked a little bit about fill and stroke. When I want to work with colors, I'm just going to click on the color panel. And one thing I did earlier is I pulled this down. This is what you usually see, the color spectrum. And I just grabbed this little handle that's at the bottom here. Hopefully you can see that. And I just grab it and drag it down. Just gives me more color to work with. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and work with those colors that are here. I also can work with RGB if I wanted to. It's going to be a lot more in-depth than the CMYK. But when I started this document, I told it my intent was print. And so I kind of want to keep that in mind. If I am going to print, I want to keep in the CMYK spectrum. All right, so I have those colors there. And I also have my swatches. And I have got all these solid swatches up here. I've got some other ones that are here. There's like a gradient, and we're going to talk about gradients in a second. And I've got some patterns. We talked about patterns in my other segment. There's two that are built in. Why there's two and only two, I don't know. But there's two patterns for you. So we have a good start. If we haven't learned how to, if you haven't watched the other one and figured out how to make them yet, you can use the couple that are built in. Then there's also some grays and some other colors that are here. And we can start adding colors as we want, as we make them as well. So if I create a shape and I fill it in with, let's fill it with green, I can go ahead and add that to my swatches panel. So I can create new swatch and tell it add. And so it went ahead and added it to the swatches panel for me. It was already there actually. Let's create a new color. Just grab one and let's make that actually the fill and come over here and tell it to create new swatch. And I can give it a name if I want to, which is really nice, especially when you've got those little swatch colors that are there. I like to have names to them. So when I roll over that swatch, I can see that I have one called purple, which went somewhere. I don't know where it went. All right, it didn't save it to the swatches panel at all. I don't know why. Let's try a new one here. Let's create this color, and let's create a new swatch, call it pink, and it's process color. I also tell it global. Global is nice so that if I make changes to this color, everywhere that color is applied will update. If I don't tell it global, it won't do that. I'll say OK. Let's come back to the swatches panel. There's my pink. I don't know why purple didn't get added there. You can tell it's kind of got a little square next to it. That just means, or this little cutout. I just went ahead and made that swatch, so that's just indicating that for me. All right, so I can add that there as well. Now, let's play a little bit with gradients, because gradients are going to come in handy when we start drawing in just